if I could just follow up on this for a second. This notion about rejecting the aristocracy because all men are created equal and power emanates from the governed, those that are governed. What about the Citizens United case? You could argue that corporations that have access to deep pockets of funding are being treated now, according to the Supreme Court, they step into the shoes of an ordinary person. And doesn't that really shift the equation? Does that, when you look at the impact of campaign funding on the electoral process, doesn't that really undercut the notion of equality among all men?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. But I would say that although we do not have established, I would say that there is equal opportunity in the country. Men become wealthy through their own means, through which is our identification of capitalism. But the Citizens United case did, in a sense, inflame that unwritten class system that we tend to turn away from.
What do you mean by explain that a little bit more, if you would?
Well, if we look to Rome, the idea of mixed government, we see a partial monarchy, partial aristocracy in areas where the people are powerful, and those were established classes. And in America, we do not have set classes. We have classes that become classes through the success of some people and through the non-success of others.
However, one could argue that our government is like a mixed government because the executive branch could be seen as an aristocracy, the Senate could be seen as a monarchy, and the House of Representatives can be seen as a democracy representing the people.
I think you kind of mix that up. The aristocracy was actually the Senate.
Oh, yeah.
The monarchy was the executive.
Thank you.
And I think Madison would probably argue with you strongly that ours is a mixed regime, that that's probably a place where we differ, but we can explore that a little more. Let's turn to Madison's argument that Republican government reflects the genius of the people. What do you see as the genius of the American people? Has it changed? And what was the genius of the Roman people at the height of the Republic's success?
Well, I think the genius of the American people and of the founders and the framers was the checks and balances system that we have in our government. As we can see in Article 1, Section 7, both the Senate and the House and the President must agree on the exact wording of the legislation.
So does that mean, essentially, are you saying that the people do not have to be virtuous, checks and balances can take the place of that?
No, I'm not saying that. I think that there's many different aspects of what the genius of the American people is, but this is one great aspect.
Okay.
I will say that the genius of the Roman people, which has now become the genius of the American people, is the idea that they were able to incorporate others into their society. For example, the Romans, when they went out to conquer others, they would incorporate, for example, the Greeks into their society. This is where we get the great historians Plutarch and Polybius. Whereas today in America, if you look, we are a nation of great diversity. We have countless religions, countless political beliefs, and we have people of all races. So I think that we have also done a great job at incorporating others into our society.
But we must take into account the idea of the classical Republican philosophy that small, homogeneous, uniform communities are more successful than diverse communities, because with more diversity comes more conflict. With less conflict, there is more progress.
Thank you. Let's go back. I wanted to go back to something else you had said. You said monarchy was not an option, which I'm sure politically was absolutely true. Nonetheless, King James I had argued a century earlier that only a king responsible to God could guarantee the liberty of all of his subjects and protect them from the tyranny of a majority. The framers had to deal with that idea. How did they deal with that?
Well, instead of adopting a monarchy, they instead have the president in Article 2, Section 1. And so this strong executive takes the place of the monarchy. And we see that it is stronger than the two consuls of Rome, who had to share power and therefore had issues when checking each other and had to resort to a dictator.
In addition, the president is an energetic executive with powers that can be used rather quickly, rather than the Senate and House of Representatives' deliberative process, which can take many days, months, years.
Also, to get back to the original point, I believe the founders had read Polybius and learned from Aristotle that democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy are in this constant cycle where after one of the branches, one of the forms of government declines, it'll collapse into the other. For example, aristocracy becomes oligarchy, which becomes a democracy, which becomes mob rule, which needs a monarch to take it over again. Now, what the historian was probably describing was that latter phase where the democracy had become mob rule, and then there had to be a monarch to reestablish rule. However, if the founders had also read Polybius, they would have recognized that mixed government was supposed to account for all of these.
Just out of curiosity, there are many people who admire the Roman Senate. Do many people admire the United States Senate?
I think that many people admire the idea of the United States Senate. I think that the idea of the United States Senate is one of genius. I think that the idea of having both a proportional and equal representation is genius, but I think that right now our Senate is going through a tougher time because we are seeing issues with lobbyists and how money is dealt with in terms of how legislation is passed.